I feel like we have to throw a party and have a celebration. It's Monday, and for the first time in what seems like a million years, it's not Monday with Grant. It's Monday with Holly. Hello, Holly.
Hi. Thanks for having me back. Apologies. It's been a bit of a crazy time.
Oh, hectic. Let's pull the curtain back on the mysteries of working in an organisation that's got to write grant applications and design programs. You've been doing all that kind of interesting stuff, haven't you?
Yes. Not enough birding. Lots of admin.
Please give us money.
Did do some birding on the weekend. It was nice. It was good.
Oh, great. We might talk about that in just a minute. Holly, let's just get this shit out of the way, right? Because it is shit. What's behind me?
One of our beautiful shorebirds currently under a huge amount of threat from the Toondah Harbour development.
Okay. And if you don't know what we're talking about, Far Eastern Curlew, right there, on a mudflat. Before we bring in our guests, which are coming up, don't worry, murder birds coming up in just a minute. But I would like you all to just watch this short presentation that was made by, Holly and her friends.
I can take.
I know,
not me.
I know you didn't
I don't
actually
want to steal
do
the
it.
thunder. No,
I know you didn't actually do it, but put together by BirdLife, and I would like you all to have a look and a listen, and then we'll get all that out of the way and talk murder birds.
Eastern curlew, it's a critically endangered bird. It migrates from Alaska and Siberia back to Toondah Harbour. They fly between 9,000 and 11,000 kilometres. They come back, they're skinny, they're exhausted, and they use the time here to fatten up.
The immediate area, it's a feeding area for eastern curlew. If you remove a feeding area, they are not able to put on weight for the long migratory journeys.
And they want to build high-rise apartments.
It must be a no-go area. Developing out onto the mudflats is totally unacceptable.
Toondah Harbour is a very important habitat. It's part of Moreton Bay. The migratory shorebirds actually spend up to 9 months a year here.
These birds feed and live on mudflats.
These birds come back to Australia. They spend more time here than anywhere else. So to say that we're going to put in a large, concrete, glitzy archipelago when that actually means trash a Ramsar site, no, not acceptable.
This is public land, and they're giving it to a private developer, taking away something that belongs to all of us.
When Raby Bay was built, within 2 years, 5,000 birds that used to roost near that area had totally gone. They totally disappeared. So for the developers to say that this is going to have no real impact is not true. The fact is that under national and international law, migratory shorebirds are all protected. The advice was this development is clearly unacceptable, and yet they totally ignore it.
When the minister goes against what the Department of Environment says, there's something to worry about.
Why have an international action plan and yet not do everything in its power to set the example? It will be a national shame if this development is given approval.
Become curious. Discover the amazing natural world that surrounds you, and then become active.
We've been fighting this for a few years now, but we're certainly not giving up.
These areas are important. They're important for birds. They're also important for people. So we need to learn to share the shorelines. We can live and we can have development where nature is a part of that development and is protected.
I've been coming here for 30 years, and it's my most dearest wish that my children and their children will be coming in here for another 50 years, and that they'll see and they'll appreciate what I'm seeing.
Hooray! Now, Holly, I'm going to actually tell people to do something that wasn't in that video. I don't want anyone to donate today. I want people to check these Twitter handles and that hashtag Toondah, and get active, because there's only a couple of weeks. It's really important. Queensland Environment / Conservation Minister, Megan Scanlon, Queensland Deputy Premier and Planning Minister, Stephen J. Miles, and the Federal Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek. Is she a pretender or is she fair income? Hashtag Toondah, get to it. Do your thing. And actually, don't like stuff. Retweet and share. That's about 10 times more valuable than liking something. And if you're a bit shy, just tag me in at Bird Emergency and I'll retweet the bejesus out of anything that you guys create. And look, the bird army just has to get active because there's only one shot at this now. You either let the bastards win or you let the birds continue to have somewhere to live. It's that simple.
It really is. So please do everything Grant said. So retweet, share, tag these people in and voice your concerns. If you want more information, you go to actforbirds.org/save Toondah. We've got a whole heap of information on BirdLife, the BirdLife website there, including that video. And you can also sign up to get more information. We're going to have some great actions coming out soon that people can get involved in. So sign up to that and we will let you know what's coming up.
Yes, actforbirds.org.au.
No, just .org. Actforbirds.org.
Oh, gee, I was putting the wrong one out all day yesterday. Okay, actforbirds.org, yeah. And hashtag Toon, that'll find you a whole heap of really interesting stuff. Okay, now that we've done that, it's murder bird time, Holly. It's murder bird time. Let's bring them in. Our guests today. Hello, Dr. Nick. Hello, Lucy.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Holly, you no doubt are all over the hashtag POWL, Powerful Owl, all over Twitter. And Lucy and Nick are probably the stars of that hashtag with the great photographs that they've been sharing for a couple of years. Suburban Brisbane. Nick, Lucy, where are your owls?
Oh, hang on. Not exactly where are your owls?
No. We're not doing that.
Area.
Yeah, we could tell you where they are, but we'd have to kill you afterwards.
That's right.
In the danger of disturbance, of course. Yeah, the problem is with the powerful owls and a lot of the owls generally that it goes off if the locations become known and it's very easy for them to get disturbed. So, yeah, we do keep it a secret.
But these ones?
Yeah, general area.
Generally, near the University of Queensland.
There are some 8 different pairs that we're following, but the ones that we're following most closely are around the University of Queensland.
So what's the kind of habitat that they're in, Nick? Is it quite suburban, or is it in streets or areas fringing streets, or is it in some kind of parkland?
Right on. Sometimes it's right on the edge of streets. It's surprising how suburban it is. They only need a very small patch of land sometimes. We've seen areas maybe 30 metres by 30 metres of trees over a creek, and they'll happily roost in there. This particular pair that we've been looking at near the University of Queensland, sometimes they're actually roosting over the road. It's crazy. And over pathways.
I first noticed them walking to work. So they're right there. They're not hiding. They're right there.
Yeah. That's partly because the tree that they are nesting in was quite close to the road. So they tend to roost near to the road because it's near to tree hollow. And then once the chicks are out, they'll retreat to somewhere a bit more secluded.
So it's often the hollow in the tree that determines where they live as opposed to how good the environment is for them. As long as they've got somewhere to roost and that hollow is the most important.
Because they are big birds, so they need a big hollow, especially when you're fitting a female powerful owl in there and then 2 growing chicks that by the time they fledge, hopefully 2 of them fledge, you've got 2 birds coming out of that hollow that are almost the same size as the adult. So it gets very cramped very quickly and they need that it's a big old tree that's going to have a big old hollow in it.
Yeah. And that's probably the limiting factor that in suburban Brisbane, there's very little old growth. They need old growth trees, really. They should need to be a couple of 100 years old so that the trees are big enough to have big enough hollows for them to be in, and that's the main limiting factor.
Yeah.
Anyone takes them down because they're in danger of falling down. Right?
Yep. That's something that we know that the trees take several hundreds of years to get a hollow big enough to grow big enough, and then to get a hollow big enough to accommodate owls, but. Is there a vegetation preference that you notice, Nick and Lucy, or will they happily make use of any hollow that's big enough?
I think any hollow that's big enough, but most of the hollows we've noticed have been in old gum trees. So red gums, scribbly gums, But they will roost in, day roost in non-natives, but the hollows tend to be in native trees.
So the What's the red gum in Brisbane? It's not going to be the river red gum that we know down here. Talk among yourselves. I'll look it up if you.
I think it might be the blue gum with you down there.
Yeah, when we talk about a red gum, we're talking about a river red gum. But let me just have a look. Holly, do you know?
Neither of us are great on our trees. We're good on ours. We're not good on trees.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember for Brisbane. Sydney, they do have a preference for Angophoras. I think we tend to find their nest hollows in Angophoras, but it's around that, you're right, that big old tree hollow. And then they need these roost sites that are nearby that have a really good canopy and ideally some good understory too. So we often find them in areas quite privity where there's a lot of cover there because, like we were saying before, when the chicks fledge, they move to a quiet spot, and so they need to go somewhere where the chicks can effectively learn to fly. So they need to have some good understory so they're protected and they're less likely to come down to the ground, which is where they're at greatest threat of getting
Our Chinese elm, which I know is seen as an invasive weed here, so everyone's taking it down, but that's where they hide.
Yeah,
that's the challenge, is that you do have this reliant on weed species for powerful owls and for other birds sometimes as well. That means that just clearing it's actually not always a great move.
No,
I think part of it is about being suburban. They want to have enough cover so that they don't get bothered by the noisy miners and blue-faced honey eaters and all those other birds that tend to mob them. So they're less fussy about the type of tree, but it's the type of cover that they want. I think that we've noticed that the more suburban they are, the more cover they want around them when they're roosting.
Yeah.
We're often quite surprised how open the more foresty birds are. You go, oh, look, there's one.
Yeah.
Eucalyptus terraticornis. Terraticornis is the forest red gum, which is what I was thinking of for Brisbane. That's the straight trunk, grey sort of usual gum tree, but that's the red gum that you'll find in Brisbane. And they also call the red gum in Brisbane the flowering gum, the one that we all know, the Corymbia piscifolia. So, yeah, but yours will be the forest red gum, I think, that you'll be seeing them in. It's interesting that they're using the Chinese elm, the Ulmus parvifolia, up there, because in suburban Melbourne, they're often found in the English elm.
Yeah, they're good cover trees.
They'll make use of whatever's there. Holly, you mentioned Pittosporum and even privet, didn't you, before?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So anything that's going to provide that cover, and that's what a lot of these weedy tree species are really great at doing, is providing that protective layer for them to use. They certainly like it nice and dark and quiet if they can find that sort of habitat. But there's that sort of core area that has their nest tree and a favoured roost site. And then, of course, at night, all bets are off. They're moving out through the landscape. But during the day, we tend to find them in those sort of...
The other thing they do tend to like is the creek beds. When we're looking for a new pair, the first thing we'll look at are where are the creek beds and also where there are good slopes.
This is the angle of the land going down to the creeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. There's lots of
sense,
associations with riparian. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's just put a couple of the photos up of some of your owls, and this one, Nick, I really liked your comment about this. What did you tell me?
I think it was the other one, but this one has it as well. It's a bit of American Gothic sort of vibe to it.
Yeah, this has got the American Gothic vibe for me. I think you talking about that one. Yeah,
that's American Gothic for me. Yeah. So these are various.
I like that one. Yeah. I can imagine them with that pitchfork. You know, that old farmer dude with the pitchfork.
Yeah, so that was a young pair from last year.
So tell us how many birds over the journey do you think you've become acquainted with?
We've got 6 pairs with following.
No, 8 pairs.
8 pairs with following. Yeah. 8 pairs with following. And how many juniors did we have last year?
We had at least 4 juniors last year. Yeah, and this year's been not so strong.
Not so successful this year.
But maybe 2 pairs. I think 2 juniors this year out of those 8 pairs.
Are they all attempting to breed each year, or is it so taxing on a pair to raise one or two owlets the previous year that they need a year off?
I've only been watching them for 2 years now. Last year was my introduction to powerful owls and my addiction almost to them. So the pairs that we have been following, one has successfully bred 2 years in a row. We've known 2 pairs that have abandoned nests this year because of the wet weather we had during their winter as they were beginning to nest.
Yeah.
And one of the pairs that we follow, we had gone into a hollow and then the rain came and they abandoned that hollow, but thankfully managed to find somewhere else to nest this year and were successful.
Yeah, it seems from what we've seen that most of them are trying most years, but this year's been a pretty bad year. There were really heavy rains in late May, which is the critical time for them to go into the hollows and so on. The main pair that we were following, they'd gone into one particular tree and they'd obviously settled in. The female was in there all day, every day for over a week. The rains came down. We guessed that they must have been flooded out, and they abandoned it and then went back to a previous tree hollow that they'd previously been successful in. It's been a bit of an odd year for the owls, at least in Brisbane.
No, we've come to know quite a few in their individual personalities.
Let's talk about that. But hello, Bob. How you going there, Bob?
Yeah, sorry, Bob's
That's good. What have you noticed about owls and their personalities? Is their females different to males, or are they very definitely individuals, or is there a sex generalisation that you can make?
There is a generalisation that they are individuals as well. So the females will give you a female freak stare, we call it, where it's like, why, oh my goodness, what's this? And then we'll settle down, whereas the male will just tend to look at you and go, oh yeah, there you go. This one doesn't quite show it because it's the wrong way round, but generally the female has that bright-eyed stare at you. And we've noticed with one of our pairs as well that the female tends to roost with one foot tucked up. Now, I can't see that.
No, that's the first males.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's just this pair of powerful owls, or whether it is across all pairs of powerful owls, or whether it's just because we've noticed it and notice it more. Yeah. But yes, but individually they're very different as well. So the ones we're following near the university are obviously really used to humans coming and going, dogs coming and going, bicycles, cars, everything. So they're much more tolerant as long as you are respectful, you watch for the signs and you keep a distance. Whereas others approach very, very carefully and really watch out for signs that they might not want you around and then clear out as soon as you get those signs.
You posted a really gruesome pic of the cockatoo chick, but we're seeing a lot of your photos are showing possums as prey species. So can you give us an idea of the range of prey that you've seen the powerful owls taking? And what I'm interested in is, are there other owl species that are in the vicinity that you've noticed because you're out at night, and are they directly competing for the same prey species, or is there a differentiation between, for instance, what a barking owl might take?
There's two parts to the prey thing for the powls, I guess. There's what they're displaying, which is what they're putting out during the day, that you can often see them as hanging underneath them. And then there's what they're more generally eating. So in terms of displaying, up in Brisbane, we've seen a lot of bats, we've seen a lot of ring-tailed possums, and occasionally brush-tailed possums, although they're quite rare because they're quite big, so it must be quite hard for the powls to catch them. But the range of prey, I think, is much wider than that, because occasionally we'll find things like frogmouths or currawong or noisy miner, which have obviously been taken apart under the nest, but it isn't something that they seem to be displaying. So I think the smallest bird that they've been observed to take are the noisy miners. So basically noisy miners are birds that they will take, including galahs and cockatoos and all those sort of things. Yeah, so we tend to just see the large mammals that they've caught, though we do find evidence of others. In terms of closeness, do you want to talk about the closeness of it's a certain location where we're seeing 3 types of powls?
Oh, yes, yeah. No,
3 types of owls.
Yeah, definitely do seem to live quite symbiotically together. We've seen there's a pair of powerful owls, a pair of barking owls, and a family of boobuks, all within, we've probably seen
100 metres.
100 metres of each other, that all seem to fulfill have different roles in their feeding habits and things like that. So I think they can live close to all the other owls. Oh, and there's always tawny frogmouths, although they're not owls. Food source, maybe.
Yeah.
Just while you mentioned tawny frogmouths, there is a fantastic Twitch channel with a camera on some tawny frogmouths, and I think it's just not owls. But I've been watching that a lot recently, so I better link that or something somewhere. But yeah, not owls, definitely.
So on diet, if I can I jump in and talk diet?
Yeah,
too?
that was what I was going to ask you. What's the powerful owl sort of programs that you've been involved with? What are they telling us about prey?
So we've done some pellet work in Sydney. I think there's been some pellets collected in southeast Queensland, but we haven't got results back on those yet. But we've been collecting for a while in Sydney, and there's been this real shift actually in diet. So in the 90s and 2000s, Dr. Rod Kavanagh did a lot of work on powerful owls in Sydney and actually helped us start off the project. And he had found ringtail possums were by far and away the most common bird showing up in pellets. So for those who don't know, a pellet is effectively owl vomit. It's the little golden nugget that us researchers get really excited about when it's found, because we can sort through it and work out exactly what the birds have been eating, because it's everything that they can't digest effectively. It's bone and fur and feathers. So Rod's work showed 3/4 of the pellets had ringtail possums in there, and then you get gliders, brushtails a little bit but not a lot, a couple of flying foxes. And since we've been doing the analysis in Sydney, there's been this shift. And even within that time, there's been a shift as well. And so ringtail possums are now about 1/4 of the diet in the pellets that we've seen. So whether that is because they've become more flexible and they're just taking different things, whether ringtails are actually becoming less common, so it's forcing them to switch diet. They also take quite a lot of brushtail possums, probably younger possums. They're probably taking the young off the back of the adult a lot of the time rather than the actual adult brushy, and quite a lot of birds. So similarly, noisy miners. I found a pair of rainbow lorikeet feet once, which was really fun. Currawongs, sulphur-crested cockatoos, and I've seen a great photo of a brush turkey, of one perching with a brush turkey, which was really nice. Very low to the ground, of course, and flying foxes as well. And there's a lot of variation in there, though. So we see, particularly towards the end of the year, inverts come in. So you'll get beetles, particularly Christmas beetles, popping up. And that's likely the young birds that are learning how to hunt, practicing on little things that they can grab easily. So we see that pop up. And then, of course, we've seen ground-dwelling animals pop up since about 2015, 2016, which unfortunately includes rat, which links into the whole rat poison investigation. A couple of rabbits occasionally, but by far and away it's the arboreal prey that is the more common diet.
Yeah, we've been noticing a lot of flying foxes with our pair up here, because there's a bat colony very close to them. And we also wondered if that's because they've depleted the possum population, because it is quite a small area that they hunt in, and whether they're now going for more flying foxes.
Yeah, very possibly. Being right next to a flying fox camp is going to be perfect for them to really focus on that as a diet. And I know we saw in Sydney, there's been some at the Royal Botanic Gardens. That flying fox camp was actually moved on and moved to Centennial Park. And when that happened, powerful owls popped up in Centennial Park for the first time in 50 years or something, and now are there all the time. They certainly will pick a favourite diet where they can get a hold of it easily.
How do powerful owls hunt? Have you watched them kill something?
Yes. So I have watched one coming in. I was really lucky. I had the female powerful owl in my binoculars, and she was watching a possum walking along a branch underneath her. And as I was watching her watch the possum, the male came in talons first and went for the possum. Now, I was so excited, I jumped up and down and lost him in my binoculars. So I don't know if he actually managed to catch it or not, but it's the closest I've come to seeing a powerful owl strike prey.
But there was another occasion when we were watching with Andrew Stafford, remember? Yeah. And so Andrew was around the corner and he was watching the male powerful owl on a tree. And then he started walking back to where we were about 30 metres away. And by the time Andrew had got to us, the owl had flown off from the perch where Andrew was and had gone to another perch where we could see it. And within 30 metres, it had picked up a possum somewhere on the way and was now just hanging with it in the tree there.
Absolutely silently.
Absolutely.
Nobody heard a thing.
Yeah.
It just gone from one spot to the other and miraculously had got a possum.
Yeah, and as we have learned from Ron and Isaac, who was on the show before, they kill by grabbing them on the head and then grabbing them on the back of the neck and snapping the neck. So it's very quick and somewhat humane.
Very efficient murder birds, no doubt about it. But what I'm interested with how they hunt is, do they break from cover to attack something that they've seen, or do they do the brown falcon thing where they'll sit out on a sentinel post? Are they an ambush hunter? Or?
Yeah, I think it's more the sort of sentinel ambush thing. Last year I saw a really interesting thing with the junior powerful owl, which had come out of the hollow that year, and it was on the side of a road, and there was a telephone wires, and it was sitting on the telephone wires, and it was sat there staring at the roof of the house for like 10 minutes, and there was nothing there, but it was clearly looking for possums or something like that. And then it moved to the next house and stood on the telephone wires there, staring at the roof of the house for about 10 minutes, and then it moved along to the next house, and again was staring at the roof of the house. And I had no doubt in my mind it was basically watching for possums to go across the roof and was ready to pounce on them should they show up. Unfortunately, that time I didn't get to see them take one.
So they're very different strategies, aren't they? Bursting from foliage like a goshawk, or sitting somewhere waiting like a brown falcon.
Yeah.
Really different strategies.
Because they're working at night, I guess they've got quite a bit of cover anyway. Even if they're quite open on a branch, they're not particularly obvious. So I'm sure they take advantage of that.
Do we know,
they tend
Holly?
to hopscotch along the vegetation too. So they don't necessarily take a huge, long flight. They'll move their way around the landscape rather than fly huge distances in any one go. So strangely enough, I don't want to say they're not a strong flyer, but it is that sort of ambush and wait approach that they have.
They're obviously not as good as at flying as Far Eastern curlers, because they're not doing 12,000 kilometres a year. Holly, I'm wondering whether we make a lot of assumptions about nocturnal birds, and of course we think they must be really good at seeing at night because they're out at night. But is there anything known, and this is right out of left field, and feel free, anyone, to take this, but do we know whether owls, powerful owls or owls generally, have better vision at night, if they're better adapted, than possums?
Oh, I don't know.
Someone ought to do a PhD on that. That would be my thought.
They've certainly got larger eyes, so you'd imagine like collecting ability.
So their eyes are very much designed for seeing at night. So I would say probably yes. Powerful owls rely on their vision for hunting a lot. So I think so. It would make sense.
I mean, we assume that, don't we? But I'm just wondering whether anyone's ever actually done. I don't even know how you would tell. You're the doctors.
I suppose you could look at the density of the light receptors in the eye or something like that. Exactly. Idea. I don't know if any studies have been done on that.
So somebody's probably done them for both species, but maybe not compared them, I would say. Yeah.
I'm going to slip into year 9, Grant, and go, rods and retinas and shit.
Exactly.
All right. Good on you. Good on you. That idea or that observed behaviour of moving from one house to another suggests that they're learning the habits of the possums, of their prey. Is there any indication that possums or other prey species learn what the owls are doing and have any defence, or are the owls a long way ahead, do you think?
The amount of possums we're seeing displayed during the nesting season, I'd say they haven't quite worked it out yet.
Yeah. And also you still regularly see them going on the telephone wires.
They still use the telephone wires to go from house to house. Probably not.
I guess the way that behaviour would be passed on would be a learned behaviour, and they probably don't get a second chance to actually pass that information on, because when they're gone, they're gone. They're taken, and that's it. The powerful owls probably don't miss a huge amount of the time, so they probably don't really have the opportunity to learn to avoid that area because they've already been taken out.
It's one of my old hobby horses from from university, learned behaviours and innate behaviours. I mean, that presupposes that possums have to learn to be afraid of owls rather than having an innate fear of a predator. Discuss.
They would have an innate fear of predators, but whether they would actually be aware that there is an owl there because they are silent flyers and hunters is probably the challenge for them. So they would absolutely know if they're going across a fence line, they scurry as fast as they can, and they probably do a bit of a listen and look around and sense whether there is any danger. But owls are top order predators, and they have all these sorts of tools to enable them to catch their prey quickly and efficiently. Their feather structure, the way the fringing on their feathers, the feathers down the legs, it helps them move silently. Their great eyesight, they are able to be in so quickly and quietly that there would be an innate knowledge of the possums to be wary at night, but little opportunity to learn if there is a miss. Yeah.
Now that just made me think of something, and I want to follow up on something you said before, Nick and Lucy, about the possums maybe being hunted out, or that's my words, but that they're less common in the area. Now, is there a real reduction in recruitment, do you think, evidently where the owls live?
I think I live really close to this pair of powerful owls, and we've definitely had less possums. And speaking to neighbours, they say, oh yes, we've noticed less possums. I think so, and I wonder, we've also had reports from people that have heard powerful owls in neighbouring streets. And so we're wondering if they're going further afield to get the possums because they have depleted the possums in the immediate vicinity.
Mm. Yeah, when I was first introduced to powerful owls by Andrew Stafford, he's mentioned the statistic about how powerful owls can take up to 300 possums a year, or probably be 300 larger prey a year. And at the time I thought, that's crazy, they can't possibly take that many. But having observed the behaviour of them and seen how much they display, no question in my mind, they could easily do that. So if you take them 300 possums in a suburban area, that's got to significantly impact the population.
Oh, absolutely. I just reached for my Australian bird guide. And
it's more varied here in that they take bats as well, but even if they're only taking 100, that's got to be a lot. Sorry.
For sure. And the reason for getting the book, I wanted to check what it tells us. And territorial, sedentary, monogamous, and long-lived. But that sort of raises a question, doesn't it? If they are in their territory and they're sedentary and they're long-lived and they're reducing the amount of possum just simply because of the sheer success that they're having, does that mean that perhaps we can't be 100% sure that they are sedentary over the course of their lives, that maybe their territories need to shift as they are cleaning out the possums, and that they would need to move into new locations? Is that something to pose?
Possible, but I think what we've noticed is a change in diet. So there's been more flying fox.
They're flexible.
Yeah.
But particularly the most unusual thing we've seen recently was a chick of soft-crested cockatoo. I believe hasn't been seen before, so they're obviously adapting. And that was crazy because it must have meant that the powerful owl went into the nest and took it out. So that's obviously unusual behaviour, given that they usually just pluck things off the trees. So they must be adapting.
Yeah, because we're not out at night all the time. Well, actually, that raises another question. Do you think the chick of the cockatoo was taken during the day or at night?
I imagine at night time, and we saw it being displayed during the day, but I would have thought it was a night time. I don't think they would have, they tend not to move too much during the day.
No.
Yeah, they only hunt after dusk, really.
A powerful owl would get hounded within an inch of its life by every mobbing bird. If it does sometimes if they get found out when they're roosting quietly. If they were out hunting, they wouldn't be able to catch anything because the miners, the magpies, the currawongs wouldn't leave them alone. So, definitely hunting at night.
And in this case, we think it was actually we mentioned the nest before that they abandoned earlier in the year, and that had been taken over by the cockatoos. and we found evidence of cockatoo feathers around the bottom of that nest. So we think it may have been the previously abandoned powerful owl nest, which they took the cockatoo chick out of.
And it's really interesting because we've lost powerful owl nest hollows to cockatoos moving, like active hollows, and the cockatoos get in and presumably kill the powerful owl chicks. So to see the tables turned has been really interesting. It's effectively, you would think for a powerful owl, a cockatoo showing up and popping into your nest hollow is home delivery. In this case, it seems to be that the only way for them to have grabbed, they had to have gone into a hollow to grab that chick. That was unfeathered. It was a good size, but it wasn't feathered. It is not something that's going to be out of the hollow by any stretch.
No.
And yet
no.
There was photographic evidence from you guys that it was sitting there with it, as clear as day.
That's right.
Yes, we've noticed with the cockatoos as well. I mean, the pair that we're watching very closely, the female tended to stay in the nest longer than other pairs that we've noticed. Mm-hmm. And the cockatoos would fly into the nest tree every evening and squawk away, and quite often would come down to the hollow and squawk within the hollow and then tilt the head to see if there was movement or sound. And on a couple of occasions, we've seen both the male and the female swoop at the cockatoos to go in and send the cockatoos flying, but they will definitely try and defend their hollow.
Yeah, that was a corker of a pic. Who claims that one? Was that you, Nick, or was that Lucy?
I was the one that posted it, but I think we both got it, yeah.
Yeah, absolute ripper. But it makes me wonder again, like we've assumed that that's unusual behaviour, but we don't know a lot really about powerful owls, and in the places where they are found, they, as you mentioned, Brom and Isaac before, they're in suburban Melbourne, they're in suburban locations, but people aren't seeing them all the time. So I wonder whether that is something that's a little bit more common, that they might be raiding nests as well.
I always say the more I learn about powerful owls, the more questions I have about powerful owls. You answer one thing, we think you answer one thing, and it opens up all these other things that you just don't know. And for such a large bird, it seems quite ridiculous that we don't know everything about them.
And I think too, they're behaving differently to what's been documented in large continuous forests. That's their preferred habitat. And so I know when we started the project, we had all these assumptions about what they would do, and they just fly against everything that we think we know, and it changes. The rats popping up in the diet was never there previously. There's hacking of territories. Just when we think, especially in Sydney, we couldn't get any more powerful owls in some of these locations, another pair pops up and you have really close proximity of these guys squeezing in. I think we have to be constantly on the move and trying to learn each time, which is why it's amazing that Dr. Nick and Lucy are following pairs so closely that they can document those changes through a season and then between seasons to build up those really good local knowledge of what's going on with individual pairs, and you can build that into the bigger picture.
Let me follow that up, Holly, with a question for each of you. 2 questions. What's one assumption that you had before you started looking at powerful owls, about powerful owls, and what's one thing that has surprised you to learn as you've got to know powerful owls? Start with you, Holly, while Nick and Lucy are checking out there.
There's a lot, because we've learned a huge amount about them. I think in terms of their general ecology, that flexibility, I think, really surprised me. That we had this assumption that that large forest species, that they were going to be in very particular locations. We were really going to struggle to find them. When we started, we estimated, based on Rod's work, going 25, 30 pairs through Greater Sydney. That's probably it. Last year we had 170 pairs, and I think we're at about 257 sites overall over the last sort of 11 years of collecting data. There is a lot more owls in urban spaces than we thought there would, which is great because natural habitat is under threat as well. And so potentially we've got the ability to shore up the larger population in our urban centres, because people are in our urban centres and people care about what's going on in their local environment. So it gives us a really great chance to conserve them. Another thing that surprised me is that a lot of them get hit by cars. So cast strike is the biggest mortality cause that we can find, at least in the Sydney population. Of course, it's always hard to find a dead bird, but each year we lose in excess of 50 birds
Holly,
being hit by a car.
Just on that, does that indicate that perhaps they will make use of carrion?
I don't think it's necessarily about carrion. I think they fly quite low over an open space. So often when they're found dead from a car strike, they're carrying prey. So we think, and again, we would need to be doing some tracking work, I think, to really work this out, that they come from the canopy and fly low with their prey and get skittled as they come down over the road. We think that that's what's happening.
Okay, that's interesting. Who wants to take those questions first, Nick or Lucy?
Okay, I've got one that I want to be good to mention. So the one thing that we were always told was that powerful owls will never go to the ground to pick up, to prey on anything. And so about 2 months ago, we saw a male powerful owl that was local to us, and it had this massive brush-tailed possum, which it was displaying all day, which we saw in the morning. And then we went back in the later afternoon, and it dropped it on the ground, and we're all going, oh no, its beautiful meal has just dropped. And because occasionally it slips out of their talons relatively often. But then we went later at dusk, and the bloody thing went and picked it up. It woke up at dusk and then went down and picked up the brush-tailed possum off the ground and then took it to the female and the chick and fed it to them, which completely astonished us because we were told, they never ever go on the ground. That's not something they do. So that's probably the thing that surprised me the most.
The thing that surprised me the most was how individual each of the birds are. You do get to know them, and they are very individual. So I thought that, being a bird watcher all my life, you look at a bird and it behaves in a certain way, and a similar bird of the same species will behave in exactly the same way, but not with the powerful owls. So that's been my take home from that.
I'll just take this opportunity for all the people on all the platforms. If you've got a question or a comment that you would like to make, tell us if you've got owls. They don't have to be powerful owls. Tell us if you've got owls in your vicinity and how well do you know them. That displaying the prey. What's that all about? Because we haven't really talked much about the habit. Let's talk about what they do once they've grabbed a possum.
We tend to see in the morning half a possum most of the time. So one assumes that they grab the prey, they have something to eat, and then they display it. We were actually discussing this morning because we're assuming that they're displaying the prey to say, I'm big and I'm powerful, look what I can catch. It's sort of a show to other animals around. But then also, in the case of things like the brush-tailed possum, are they just unable to consume that amount in the night, and then they hang on to it during the day to consume the next night?
That's what I was wondering, because when we use the term displaying, that to me conjures up, look at me, I got the possum, blah, blah, blah. But instead, it might just be like, I'm stuffed, and they've put it on the table next to them while they've fallen asleep watching telly.
I believe there was one study that showed that it compared the bone sizes of the possums that were displayed to the bone sizes which were found in pellets and so forth. And it seemed that the possums which were being displayed were bigger, which, again, you could interpret as it's showing the biggest possible possum to say, I'm really big and hard. But again, it might be that the big possums are just the ones that it can't eat all of it during the night, and so there's still some left. So I don't know. Maybe Holly's got something to say on that.
It could be either or. But during the breeding season too, you'll find that, of course, the male is the one responsible for doing all the hunting because the female's in the hollow. So he'll catch the prey. And then he needs to be able to feed the chicks when they're ready to be fed at dusk. So he'll sit with it all day, and then right on dusk, often you'll see he's got a roost site that's quite close to the nest tree, and then he'll do a little bit of a call depending on how far into the season it is, and he will carry that food in. So the young are getting fed right on dusk, so that's that first energy hit for them for the day. So I think part of that holding the prey is to have that food ready for the immediately, and then maybe he goes off afterwards. It's hard to know because we're not watching them at night usually. He might go and then actually do his own hunting for his own food after he's looked after the female and the young, and then potentially he gets something to eat and then catches something else to then be ready to go for the next night for the young.
Actually, that reminds me of one of the other surprising things that we've seen. We've occasionally seen females displaying as well, which we didn't even know happened. But yeah, it definitely has happened.
Yeah, amazing.
Nick and Lucy, how did you get into owls? Was it just by chance that you just saw them while you were out doing other things, or did you go purposefully looking for owls?
No, for me, I've always been a bit of a bird watcher. I was very fortunate. My father's a bit of a birder, so growing up, you always knew they were there. And I first heard powerful owls probably about 6 years ago in the area where the pair are that we follow. But didn't know about the Powerful Owl Project, didn't do anything about it, but it was last year, and it was just walking along and noticing all the whitewash or scat underneath on the path and looking up, and there was a powerful owl. It doesn't happen every day of the week, and because it was so close, I popped down in the morning and on my way to work and see it, and then I go in the evening. And in the evening, last year being COVID, everybody was locked down, and so there was quite a large community of neighbours that would come out in the evening to watch these powerful owls. And that's where I met Dr. Nick and Andrew Stafford and really became quite addicted to powerful owls. In fact, my youngest one, I overheard her saying to a friend of hers, "Oh, Mum's going out to look at the owls again." She's looking at the same owls. Sometimes they're even on the same branch. So it was purely by chance, but then I realised that we were both quite addicted to them and enjoyed not so much the challenge, but the adventure of going to find other powerful owls. Once you get to know them and you get to know their habitats and what they like and don't like, we have seen on Google Maps a park and thought, oh, that might be good for powerful owls, and popped in, and within 20 minutes we found a powerful owl. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah, actually we found that the best way to find a powerful owl, though, is you go around and you look under trees and you find scat, and then you say, oh, there's some scat. Maybe we'll take a picture of Lucy looking at the scat, pointing at the scat. That'll make a good photo. And then you look up and go,
oh, there it is.
Swear word, there's a powerful owl. That's the best way to find a powerful owl.
I'm interested in what you just said then, Lucy, about looking on Google Maps and thinking, oh, there might be a powerful owl there.
Yeah.
So using your Google Map detective skills, what do you look out for? Like, what would you identify as a likely powerful owl location?
So it has to be sizable, but not overly sizable, but it does have to have creek lines. And usually one of those creeks has to have water in it. And that's generally all we've...
Yeah, and if you can get a sense of the tree cover as well, if the tree cover's good, good tree cover near the creek lines, and if there's good terrain, uneven terrain. The problem is that these rules are not really rules, and you find them in flat terrain. But a month ago, we found a owl in a very flat piece of ground, not particularly close to a creek, and the trees probably weren't more than 8 meters tall or something like that. So there's always exceptions, but generally dense tree cover, creek lines, and now the finding it in 20 minutes was an exception. Most of the time you're walking creek lines for a lot and looking for any clues. As Nick said, you're looking for the scat underneath the whitewash is generally what we look for. And there is a distance from the creek and the elevation of the slope that they do look. And after a while, you get a feel, and we'll both say, I think if there is one, it'll be on this side of the creek, not that side of the creek. Yeah. Oh, and the other great thing that happens is sometimes we get tip-off from members of the public.
We heard one over here, so we're going to have a look.
Yeah, and that's absolutely brilliant. And if anybody's listening and seen or heard any owls, please tell Holly or us, and we'll follow up.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to remember that a lot of the work that we do and the work that Dr. Nick and Lucy does is during breeding season. And so we do have to be really careful not to disturb the birds when we're doing this work. And I know Nick and Lucy don't do that at all, of course. When we do the Powerful Owl Project in Brisbane and Sydney, we provide people with information on how to go about finding them, but also things to remember. No, we don't flash lights at them. We stay with at least 30 metres away from a nest tree or a suspected nest tree. And if we do spot the male in particular, if he's out of the hollow, you need to look for the signs of him being either calm or being quite stressed out by your presence. So if he's staring, if he's trying to size you up, I think he does, like the foot lift, I think too, can be a sign that he's quite stressed. It's about backing off and leaving them be. There can be swoopy ones, so you don't want to get swooped by a powerful owl. It's not a pleasant experience. So certainly doing all the things that Nick and Lucy are talking about, you're looking down and searching for them and getting a sight of them, but then being mindful of not disturbing the birds and getting the look and leaving them to it is really important for you and for them and for you, because, as I said, I've seen some injuries before when people have been swooped and hit.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think the project mentions like 30 metres is the minimum distance, and or try and keep outside that. Maybe stand next to a tree so you're not so obvious.
Yeah, we try and have sun cover over us so we're not just an outline of human beings.
Yeah, and noise is very important as well. I think they really get annoyed by snapping branches and things like that and talking. So, keeping them very quiet and moving stealthily is very important.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I'm just thinking back to that description you gave us of the kind of habitat, the localities that they would be in. But I'm wondering, in the urban settings that you, Nick and Lucy, are aware of, but also Holly, that you've been monitoring with the project in Sydney as well, how far, side to side, edge to edge, do you think a powerful owl territory is in the suburbs?
So I guess it depends on what you mean by a territory. So for the project and for Nick and Lucy, most of the time we're watching just that little core habitat. It's the nest tree and the roost sites, and that's quite small. At night, the only way to work that out is to be tracking them. So I need to go back to my data because we had an honours student a few years ago who actually tracked birds in Sydney. So I will look up what she found. And otherwise, Dr. Nick Bradsworth at Deakin University with John White and Raylene Cook have done a lot of work on tracking and doing territory size of powerful owls in urban Melbourne. There's a lot of variation, so it depends on how urban your birds are as to how far they will move. Off the top of my head, I'll have to have a quick look. I think it was surprisingly small in urban centres and much smaller than a continuous forest habitat, where I think it's about 1,000 hectares is about the territory size. In urban centres, it is well under half that. For the most part.
I seem to remember seeing something about 4 square kilometres, like a 2x2 square kilometre in
something like that. Yeah,
in the sort of urban environment.
Yeah. So high concentration of prey in urban centres. The possums are around, or the colony, the bat colony is right there. So we find that with a lot of birds, as territory sizes in urban spaces tend to be a lot smaller than natural habitats.
And the roosts removed quite a bit, but they're typically within maybe 100 and 150 metres of each other. So the day roosts are all in a fairly small area, but they move around each night or each day. Yeah.
Holly, does that mean that in a forest environment that we actually have a lesser population density of prey species like possums than we do in town?
Probably do, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just looking, Nick's work in Melbourne, home ranges are between 300 and 500 hectares. So it's not huge for a top order predator, for the amount of food that they need to get.
So of course I need to come up with an example of that. So yeah, I'm just thinking, how big is a netball court?
I think Olympic soccer unit, isn't it?
Okay,
you're a mathematician, Nick. 30 metres by 15 metres.
No, don't do that.
I had to do it. I can't do it. Yeah, so how's that?
I think the figure you gave before was 3 to 5, so about 3 square kilometres, 5 square kilometres.
Okay. And in Sydney, we had similar. Our smallest was only about 16 hectares, so it was tiny, just over 600.
So that's, I'm thinking of my suburb. That means if everywhere in my suburb was appropriate habitat, we could have about 10 pairs just in my suburb. So that's pretty wild.
Could do. Those key habitat features need to be there, though.
Yeah. No, that's right. If the whole area was appropriate living space, so Yeah.
I mean, we've seen them in very small scraps of
Parkland,
that have been by 30 metres by 40 metres a square of parkland. So it's really public park size sometimes, rather than conservation area even. Yeah, the only limitation is the tree hollows, really, for the breeding.
Yeah. And, Holly, we mentioned earlier on that they are long-lived, but what do we think the average... Two questions. What do we think the average age is, and what's the average productive lifespan, do you reckon? Because I'm guessing that they probably finesse and they might live a little longer than they breed.
Yeah, good question. I think off the top of my head, 20 to 30 years, I think, is about a lifespan of a powerful owl from what I can remember from Hansard. And in terms of reproductive age, I know the assumption is that they don't breed them till they're about 5 or 6, but we suspect, again, it's one of those things that we're like, but in urban spaces, is that actually holding true? Are they younger? We don't really know in urban areas about age in which they're breeding. One of the challenges we've got is that the breeding territories are stable. You get a pair set up and they tend to stay there unless something happens to one of them, in which case they generally will, another powerful owl will come along and fill that gap and pair up. But where the individuals go, the young birds, is difficult to understand. We don't know how they move across the landscape. They are these sort of roamers that pop up. And we don't know. We're trying to uncover, actually. We're doing a little bit of work in Sydney now looking at the genetics of the population and seeing if we can pinpoint who is related to who and how far they will disperse. So that's all pending at the moment. But I don't know whether, Nick, Lucy, you can remember anything off the top of your head about age?
No, I think it was what I've read with 20 to 30. And you saying about how old they are before they start to breed would tie in with the fact that I first heard of powerful owl about 6 years ago, and then first noticed them about last year as a breeding pair. And I suspect that I've heard the male and the female. We think the female's quite young. Her behaviour has changed between last year's chick and this year's chick. And I think because they've been there, and I haven't checked, maybe the Powerful Owl Project has got data on them before last year, but I think last year might have been their first breeding year.
The limiting factor of how many hollows are available, I wonder whether that is actually a major effect on how birds behave, like how early they begin to breed. If there's nowhere to breed, why would they even be kicking in? They're just hanging out with mum and dad.
Oh, they're not allowed to hang around with mum and dad. They're kicked out, man. They're out. Come sort of January or so, they're on their way. They have to head off. But they do move around the landscape, and so it's hard to know who's who and who's related to who. I'm doing way too many who's in this, but exactly. And I think we're getting we've got to do some work and compare Brisbane and Sydney a little bit more, because I think the situations are quite different. There are many less urban powerful owls in southeast Queensland and in Brisbane than we know of in Sydney, but the project has also been going for a lot longer. I also think it's probably a topography thing. A lot of where we get these birds is through those creek lines and that riparian vegetation. Again, the topography, like Lucy was saying, and there's a lot of that through urban Sydney, particularly through the northern suburbs and the northern beaches, and also to the south, that they come right into the urban landscape quite exclusively. You get them in the Botanic Gardens right next to the CBD. Whereas Melbourne as well, they're a bit more on the urban fringes that are coming, because that's the topography of Melbourne, is the fringes are on the outside sort of coming in, whereas in Sydney they're a lot more embedded within the landscape itself. And I think Brisbane's probably the same, as much more on the outside and then the fringes coming in towards the middle. Although we do have famous powerful owls that have been in the gardens in the centre of the city in Melbourne. So, but my thought would be it's not so much a function of the suburbs or anything like that. It's just where are there appropriate trees with hollows. My punt would be that if Kylie and her team, the City of Melbourne and whatnot, would be putting hollows into places all over Melbourne, I reckon the birds would probably pop up.
So
it's about a hollow, though.
Yeah.
Sorry, go
I was going to mention that there have been attempts to make bird boxes for powerful owls. I think that's one of them worked one. And more recently, there was a project where someone transferred a tree hollow. So took a tree hollow out of a tree which was being cut down and put it into another tree. And that successfully this year had house breeding in it. People are heading to, and also there's another project in Melbourne that they were trying to 3D print.
The 3D printing, that's the one that has had some success that I'm aware of. So I think there's a number of strategies that are going to get going. But hey, I guess they're really expensive to produce.
They are really expensive. They are, and I think there's also. Sorry, go Nick.
No, up to you, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, I guess the thing to remember, nest boxes are great, and if they work, it's fantastic. We haven't quite cracked the code for powerful owls yet. I know Kylie and her team are doing that amazing 3D printing, and like Nick said, there was the supplementary hollow that worked in Central Vic, I think it was, this year. Yeah. But a tree is much more than just its hollow, and so I think the danger is assuming that we just need to stick some nest boxes up and we'll be fine. Negates the significance and the importance of an actual big old tree and the value that it has. It's much more than just its hollow. And so I just don't want us to get in the position where you can substitute a tree for a nest box. I think that's when there's a problem.
And particularly when we talk about the economics of it. Now, Nick, put on your thinking cap here. Mick Callan told me that based on his experience and his knowledge of the landscape, we need over 1 billion hollows to replace what's been lost in recent times. Now, one of his boxes costs about, let's say, $350 with all the bits. You got to hang it up. You need an arborist to do it. You need your insurance. So let's say they're going to cost minimum $750 each, and then you've got to maintain them. So let's put another $200 on every couple of years for 1 billion. For 1 billion hollows, how much do we have to allocate in the budget?
Yeah, well, exactly. It's getting towards $1 trillion, isn't it? I mean, it's much better just to get people not to cut down the trees.
It'd be much easier if we just left the bloody things alone. And just think of the cost that's involved in saving stuff that we don't need to wreck.
And you also then not all. Sorry, go Lucy.
Oh, no, it was just that I had a question. Somebody had replied to one of my tweets, and I looked into how dangerous trees are because they're known as widowmakers here. I'm originally from the UK, didn't come here till about 20 years, didn't know about widowmakers. And so I looked into it. I've got a large gum tree at the back of the garden. Some neighbours love it, some hate it and want us to take it down because it might fall down. And so I looked into the statistics of it falling down, and very, very slim. If it's going to stay upright unless there's a completely freak weather accident, and you can't mitigate that against that anyway.
No, you're much more likely to have a delivery van miss a corner and smash into your place, right?
But we've got a problem with insurance. So some insurances don't cover you if you have a large old gum tree near your house. They see it as a liability. So there is another cost involved there of actually keeping a tree. So even if you want to keep a tree, it may not be cost effective for you to keep it. So I think we've got to change people's attitudes that actually being hit by a falling tree is so rare. But because it is so rare, it's often in the media, and so we all hear about it.
That's why we've got to call out bullshit on all this stuff, because how many once in 500 year flood events have we had in the last 5 years? And it's a couple. Right, the risk is not in one tree falling down and destroying your house. We need to have a greater tolerance for risk if we actually want to live in urban settings in a time of climate change.
Yeah, but and the risk is actually really low. I think it was something like 1 in 25 million getting killed by a tree branch in a year in Australia. So one person in Australia, and that was. And if you're actually in your house, it was like much lower.
That's right.
People who are going out during storms that are getting hit by tree branches.
That's right. And most of those figures are skewed again by idiots who camp under trees.
Yeah.
Right. Now, that's one of the first things you learn in Scouts or whatever is tent, tree branch, no. You just don't do it. But people go, oh, it's a lovely spot, let's camp here. They skew the figures. Take those idiots out, and then all of a sudden it's probably one in, what did you say, 25 million? It's probably 1 in 150 million, really. So that means one person in Australia every, 6 years might die. But we still get in our cars every day, don't we?
If you cut down all of the trees, but if you're only cutting down selected trees, then the chances are that you're not making much difference to that statistic anyway.
No, that's right. And actually, just to labour the point, one of the things I noticed after the big storm we had, I think last year here, where hundreds of trees fell over, it wasn't because the trees were unhealthy. It was because the ground was really wet and the wind came from an unusual angle. So the trees had grown over 50 years for a prevailing wind and wet ground in one condition. And as soon as it was different, it wasn't that they were rotten or anything like that. It was just that they weren't anchored in the ground properly and they blew over. They weren't damaged. So people really see a tree falling over and assume that it was a rotten tree. And often it's just the fact that when you put in the pool 30 years ago and somebody else put in the retaining wall and dug in a driveway, that actually severed the anchoring roots 15 years ago. And that's why the tree has fallen over, not because it was rotten. So we just need to be fair income about things. Holly, tell us about how people can be involved in the Powerful Owl project.
As we've been saying, we've got active volunteers in Greater Sydney and in Southeast Queensland. So if you just Google Powerful Owl Project, you'll get to the BirdLife Australia website with some information. And we've got our amazing project officers in both locations. We've got Andrew Dinwoody in Southeast Queensland and we've got Jenny Zlovenek in Greater Sydney. So we're busy collating and seeing how the birds have gone this year. Fledging is almost over for birds now, and we think it's going to be a pretty hard year. As Nick was saying earlier, all this unprecedented rain right at the sort of start of the breeding season and then again at the end of the breeding season means that we've seen a lot of failure this year, and I think it's going to be a pretty hard one. So we're currently looking at that now, but we're always ready to train people early in the new year. So if you contact us through the BirdLife Australia website, there will be email addresses on there. We can get you on the list for when training starts next season.
Okay, a couple of rapid fire things. Okay, Lucy and Dr. Nick, where's the most unusual or surprising location, not exact location, but situation perhaps, where you have seen a powerful owl?
Yeah, probably roosting over the road, quite a major road.
Yeah, so cars are literally passing underneath this big male powerful owl. And yeah, he was a long way away the next day. He realised he'd made a big mistake in the choice of his roost. I think he was attracted to that tree because the junior had roosted. Yeah, it's interesting with the juniors. When they come out, they seem to do a random flight in various directions and then find new roosts every night. And rather than the parents deciding where they should go, they follow the chick. And in this case, the male got freaked out by being in the same tree as this little chick over the road.
Yeah. Holly?
Okay, so I didn't see this personally, but I've seen the photographic evidence of it. So a few years ago, we had a male end up in Castle Hill Shopping Centre in Sydney, and he was in there for a good few days before Wildlife Rescue could get him out. So that was an interesting one. And there's also been
plenty of pigeons and sparrows or whatever for him to eat,
yeah,
I would imagine.
He wasn't a big fan of being in there. So that was a pretty stressful situation. I've also seen a photo of one sitting on a car, in a used car lot. So again, not great flyers, and especially the young birds heading out. If that canopy cover isn't there, they end up in weird locations. But then one of the famous pairs in Sydney is at Centennial Park, and those birds roost above the cafe quite regularly. So you can sit out and just look up, and there's some powerful owls sitting in the fig tree looking at you. It's pretty amazing.
Pretty cool. Nick and Lucy, you're now like the go-to famous powerful owl people.
There are many others. Yeah, there are many others.
No. I'm just saying because of your visibility with posting stuff and on Twitter. So people are going to be telling you our stories, and you're probably feeding them off to other people. But the same with you, Holly. What I wanted to know is, where is the most unusual place or the most far-flung location in Australia that you've heard of where there has been a verified, confirmed powerful owl sighting?
I don't think I've got any.
That's just, what's the distribution map tell us?
Well, sorry, Holly.
No, go, Nick. You're fine. It's all right.
They're basically all over the eastern seaboard, all the way from Victoria up to maybe Bundaberg,
mid Queensland.
And typically within about 100 or 200 kilometres of the coast. So they're all over.
Yeah, they very much hug the coastline, really, and they just eke into South Australia. There's a couple of pairs over the border. So, they don't, I can't think of any weird
I was really hoping you were going to say, someone's seen one in Dubbo. No, that little attempt at comedy didn't work, did it? Yeah, I'm scrubbing that.
Someone now will report some Tasmanian powerful owl or something really strange for us.
Yeah, or somewhere in the Gulf of Carpentaria or something like that. I'm wondering if there are outliers. Actually, do we have? I should have looked, didn't we? What are they categorised as, Holly? Are they threatened?
So they're not listed federally. Each of the states that they occur in, they're listed as vulnerable or threatened, depending on what the classification system is. So, state level, yes, they're listed. Federally, they're not listed.
Very good. Very good. Okay, I reckon we've pretty much done powerful owls. There's a few more things to talk about. Lucy, Dr. Nick, where can people track you down to follow owl stuff?
I'm at Lucy Parker Paul on Twitter.
I'm Dr. Nick on Twitter, DOKTRNICK. That's the main place that we post and share information.
Yeah, you've got the weird doctor. I'll put obviously share that around and everything. And if you're looking on Twitter, if you go hashtag POWL, and you can put an S on as well, it'll still find all of Nick and Lucy's stuff.
There's also the album Urban Powerful Owls is the Powerful Owl project on Twitter, which is also good to follow.
Hashtag Urban Powerful Owls.
Oh, no.
Or is it at
Urban Powerful Owls is Deakin Uni. Yep, that's that Melbourne crew who do amazing stuff. Yep.
Okay, we'll consolidate all of that. Now, this week, Holly, it's Australia's special week.
It's Bird Week, baby. It's Bird Week.
So what does Bird Week mean that we all have to do, Holly?
You all have to download the Aussie Bird Count app and you all have to go out and do a 20-minute bird survey for us at BirdLife Australia and tell us what you... So it's designed to be super easy for people who are not experienced birders. There's a bird finder built into the app as well, so you don't need to know the name of everything. You just put in some bit of info about how big the bird was, what sort of shape it had, what sort of colours you saw, and then you get a list of possible candidates. So it's designed to be nice and easy. You can do it as many times over the week as you like, in whatever habitat you like.
AussieBirdCount.org.au. There we go. Now, there's another one I want to talk about. Now, where is it? I had it up. Where did I put it? Here we go. Let me remove that one. Stop that screen. Get that one out. Bear with me, folks, because not only is it Bird Week in Australia, the Kiwis have got Bird of the Year on the go. So that's birdoftheyear.org.nz. Now, Nick, I know you've been listening to some bird emergency stuff, and I hope you have too, Lucy. Did you catch the live stream about light pollution and seabirds with Ariel Hesworth?
Oh, sorry, I missed that. I have to go up to YouTube and follow that.
Yeah, it's not out in the pod feed, I don't think, yet.
Oh, okay.
But Ariel is a big fan of the Cook Petrel and the cookies, hashtag cookies for Bird of the Year. So, yeah, get on that. I did want to make sure that we give that a fair go. What else? Oh, the other thing I wanted to plug is, let me pull this one up. See that?
Great book.
See that? Right. Now, it's the way to learn if you're new to going out and seeing birds and seeing trees and seeing mushrooms and all that. It's the best way to learn what's going on in your neighbourhood and how to record things, how to recognise things. So the Urban Field Naturalist Project, the guide to creatures in your neighbourhood. So because it's Bird Week and people might be getting out there and starting off becoming a bird watcher and going to the bird count and all of that, it all meshes in together. Get out there and maybe you'll find a powerful owl. Can I do 2 more plugs, Holly?
It's your show, mate. You can do what you want.
What's that one?
So that's the Birds in Backyards website. So the birdemergency.com/birds in backyards, which is where you find information on bird-friendly gardening and how to, outside of Bird Week, monitor the birds in your garden by doing a Birds in Backyards survey.
See, it might be my show, but that's your bloody thing, right? Birds in Backyards.
It is.
But since it is my show, here I've got the begging bowl out. I'd really like it if you bought me a coffee, because now they're about $100 apparently to go and get a coffee. And still trying to get the community tab in the YouTube. So the birdemergency.com/YouTube. The community tab just means I can do more stuff and share more things and get more people into the universe. And just before we sign off, go and bug these people on Twitter. #Toonda. Tag all these people in. Feel free to tag me in at Bird Emergency, and don't just like stuff. If you like curlews, Tanya Plibersek. If you don't hate curlews, save Toonda Harbour, or actually piss Toonda Harbour off. Save the stinky mudflats and the mangroves, because we need them. Okay, unless someone's going to jump in right now with a comment or a question, because you can do that. Peanut Gallery, thanks for being with us. Say thanks to Dr. Lucy, and Dr. Nick, Dr. Holly Parsons from Birds in Backyards, BirdLife Australia. I'm Grant. I do the Bird Emergency because it's my show. Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.